Campbell here from Stonecastle Asset Management for the Stonecastle Investment Management Cannabis Week Update. Okay, Bruce, so tell us, what did you make of the Aurora financial statement?
Well, I mean, obviously they were messy, right? And I mean, we knew that that was going to be the case based on the pre-release. There's a lot in there. I mean, obviously still looking for a CEO. The one thing that I did take out of it, I guess there were a few things I took out of it, but the one thing I took out of it was, their costs are still fairly low, right? They're 88 cents. The cash costs were 88 cents per gram, which was up a little bit from the previous quarter, but that's the range of where they're going to have to be. Obviously, they can drive it lower, and I think they probably still do over time. The balance sheet obviously continues to be a concern, and obviously the sales. We'd like to see more sales. That being said, I have seen lots of sales data from the dispensaries, and it seems like a lot of their 2.0 products are fairly popular. So, and the fact that the stock price, obviously since they pre-released is down, I think close to 20% with the move it has made up. But following their release, the stock price actually jumped up on Thursday.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I think that we might have seen the worst for Aurora now. I think that the only thing that needs to happen is a 10-for-1 rollback on the stock, and they've got a shot at the big time. Not something that investors are going to want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That could be a potential. They also still have to deal with this debt that's coming due, so that's going to be a challenge. And I suspect that you could end up seeing, probably more dilution on that behalf, right, as well.
Sure.
So. But most people are probably pricing that in at this point in time. They're thinking about the worst case scenario, why the stock moves up on a day when the earnings come out and aren't that great.
Yeah, well, I would think they would have to negotiate the covenants with the debt holders to get them to accept the fact that they're going to take a conversion early, post rollback, and I think then everything would be fine. But anyways, enough about Aurora. What else is really catching your interest this week?
Well, I mean, we saw this release now that Alberta is going to move ahead with vapes. I mean, that's a big category, and it's one that there was obviously some concern that they weren't going to move ahead with that. But now they've come out and said, yeah, we're going to move ahead with vapes. And I can't remember what the actual selling period when it will begin, but it's going to roll out in the next several weeks here, and obviously that's a big category. In the U.S., and we wanted to, I think a lot of those companies are banking on that. So if you sort of extract that out, or, not to use that pun, but like a lot of the companies that will probably benefit here are the companies that do extraction, because, that's where a lot of the product is being used in the 2.0 and specifically in the vapes. So you'll start to see, you could potentially see some ramp up in some of the earnings of those companies. So we were happy to see that, given that that's, kind of one of the bigger markets in the country, at least per capita.
Yeah, you bet. Do you think what do you think the risk level is that vapes as a delivery mechanism for cannabis generally sort of takes on more of a sinister hue in the context of health? They've identified this vitamin E acetate as the principal culprit in the majority of these vapes, but to me it seems that there is not nearly enough research done. There's not nearly enough data around the long-term effects of vaping cannabinoids. And so I wonder to what extent that Alberta is maybe jumping the gun a little bit, as Albertans are potentially sort of want to do just by their sort of national character, as it were. I hope I didn't offend any Albertans out there. I love Albertans.
I mean, if you look at the heat that, say, someone like Juul in the U.S. has been getting, and I mean, that's not cannabis related. That's just vapes, right? They're taking a lot of heat right now for sure. And I suspect that this is going to be like anything else that we've seen down the road. There's probably going to be a bunch of regulations on what you can do and can't do, and how you produce it, and how you what kind of warnings you have on it. But I think it's probably gonna stick around, but it'll turn out to be like smoking, right? Where everyone said, oh, this is like the savior to smoking. Well, no, actually it's not. It's just a different way to do it. And by that point in time, there's going to be a certain amount of people who are addicted, and they can't quit, just like the cigarette smokers who know it's bad for them, but they still do it, right? So
yeah.
That would be my take on it. That I mean, that's probably going to come in the years to come, but it's not right now.
Right. There was an interesting story in the BBC. I don't know if you saw it this week. The title was "Cannabis Oil Products Could Be Off the Shelves in a Year." And the implication was that if the cannabis products that are currently being sold in the UK are not registered with the Food Standards Agency in Britain, that they would be off the shelves, they'd be taken away from sale. And it's not just a matter of registering these products. They haven't really got a framework for approving anything that contains cannabidiol or any of the other CBDs in the UK, despite it being legal for medical purposes in the UK. So do you think that is potentially a threat to the entire CBD industry globally? Is that this paranoia, this lack of policy from the FDA has now sort of contagiously infected the UK, and is that something that could see CBD removed from the entire product mix in the near term while governments try to sort out this lack of policy?
I mean, obviously, it's got to be a risk that you consider. I saw that article, or I saw the headline for that article. I didn't read it. And then I also saw another article talking about how they thought that it could be fully legalized in a year. So, there's so much back and forth that goes around. I mean, obviously, the FDA and, what they're going to, eventually rule on will probably have a pretty heavy hand in what countries around the world do. I mean, obviously, United Nations and World Health Organization also, that's going to probably have an impact on what happens with CBD as well. But certainly there is a potential risk there. That being said, I mean, there's so much anecdotal evidence that's been around on the plant that doesn't seem to show a lot of harm. If it's used as an adult and in moderation, right? It seems to be if it's used before someone's fully mature, their brain's fully mature, and obviously the amount that they're using. But I think probably the delivery method's probably more critical than anything else.
Right. So tell me, Bruce, what do you see as the most critical sort of events or potential catalysts on the near-term horizon going into the end of Q1 here in 2020? And what do you see at this point, now having had the benefit of a month and a half's look back of 2020, what do you see as the big things that have emerged as issues that maybe weren't so much issues last year?
Yeah, so the sales is obviously the biggest thing, right? And I mean, that's going to be the biggest catalyst, and it's going to be also the biggest potential negative. We've heard of Ontario and how they want to come out and roll out all these stores, but it's like everything else. How long before it actually happens? So people are sort of hanging on that thread that, hey, this is actually gonna work, and these companies are gonna have great sales, and we're all gonna be saved in the cannabis industry. But if it takes longer, and maybe they say, well, hey, we're gonna delay this, and it's gonna be later this year that it starts to roll out, and then we'll see, sort of full rollout in 2021. Well, now all of a sudden the brakes go on again, because that's going to be an issue. So that can be a great upside if plans are rolled out according to plan, and then it can be a huge downside if it gets delayed at all. And we know how things go; they tend to get delayed. The other side too that obviously we want to watch is the uptake of these products, these 2.0 products in Canada, because initially there's been a lot that's done, but that's the pent up demand that people were waiting and anticipating. Now we really need to see them start to gain market share from the black market, and I think that probably comes down to pricing. And so the initial impact right away is the people who were sitting waiting for these 2.0 products to show up have now gone out and purchased them. Do they repeat? And you start getting people who do crossover. So those are some of the ones in Canada I look at. In the US, obviously it continues to sort of roll around what's happening with some of these MSOs, what they're going to do, because they still have huge capital needs. Some of them have recently gone to the debt market. Do they do sale and leasebacks? Do they do more equity issues? Can they do equity issues in this environment? And sort of what happens on that front, and that, both in Canada and the US will have an impact on, who's going to survive, right? There's going to be companies that just run out of money. Hard to believe that, a year ago they could raise as much money as they wanted, and a year later now we're talking about them not having enough money to get their projects completed. So, what does that mean from a competitive standpoint, and who disappears and who doesn't? And obviously watching those balance sheets and watching their operations really closely on the downside.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, what do you think when you look at California? I mean, California was supposed to be like the leading market in the world, and we saw the departure of Adam Bierman after MedMen failed to sort of gain critical mass in the market share and is losing money. Caliva out of San Jose laid off 200 people on February 4th. Ease, supposedly the biggest delivery service in Los Angeles, laid off 36 people, and one of the leading vape manufacturers, CannaCraft, laid off 40 employees, or about 16% of its workforce. Does that, to you, suggest that California is not going to be the golden land that everybody thinks it is?
Well, it's a little similar to, fairly similar to what's happened in Canada, right? I mean, the market is there. Everyone knows it, but it's still a black market, right? Estimates that I have heard are still, 85 to 90% of the production is a black market. So if you're a black market dealer, man, times are still great for you.
Yeah.
If you're trying to do it in the legal framework, you're having a difficult time, and they got to figure out, how to get the tax issues, the reporting issues, the tracking issues all sorted out so that there's ease of logistics to take that away from the black market. And then obviously they need enforcement to try to obviously the best enforcement would be if you saw lower prices and people just automatically started buying from legal sources versus the black market. We also need the black market to be taken out, from a law enforcement standpoint. And that's not, that doesn't, all of a sudden you just don't get a flood of, guys in windbreakers busting down doors. It's one at a time. And that, that takes a long time to, remove an ingrained culture, much like it will here in BC and in parts of Canada, right? There's people who are set in their ways and they know what they want and they're used to producing a certain way, and it's going to take a while to turn that over. California will inevitably be the biggest market at some point in time, but who's going to be able to survive the weight as it goes from being a black market to a legal market?
Yeah, you bet. So where do you envision deploying capital most judiciously this year?
I mean, you're going to have to be really selective. I think that, we're probably, going to see a rally where you really see the bifurcation now at this point in time, where you're going to see a select group of companies, probably the ones that, have been the best stewards of capital to date. And that's a pretty skinny list, right? Like if you take a look and say, well, how much money's been raised and who's done a good job with the money they've raised, that list gets pretty small. So those are the ones I think where the best kind of opportunity going forward is.
You bet. All right, Bruce, that's an awesome update as usual. We'll have you back next week. Thanks for joining us today. Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah, thank you.